Here's the thing. If I eat a sugary cookie, the sugar lures you in like the Trojan horse, but waiting inside that cookie is a huge load of butter or shortening, and that's what fattens you up, and that's the part that leads to the diabetes.
But I thought cholesterol and saturated fat wasn't an issue anymore.
You know, these saturated fat studies that have come out trying to vindicate saturated fat, this is a campaign by the dairy industry, right? Number one source of saturated fat is dairy. It's not meat. 2008, the global dairy industry got together at a meeting and explicitly, read their agenda, was to neutralize the negative impact of milk fat by regulators and medical professionals, unquote. So what did they do? They funded studies.
The main study that started the whole saturated fat media craze was funded by the National Dairy Council. The egg industry similarly funds studies that confuse consumers by making claims that eggs don't negatively affect heart function. That is, only when compared to eating a McDonald's sausage McMuffin? So what they're really saying is that eating eggs is just as bad as eating a McMuffin.
When you eat foods like beef or steak or a processed meat, a hot dog, you're not just getting saturated fat. You're also getting other additional toxins that are in that food. There's heme iron, carcinogens, processing chemicals. This is all a lot more complicated than just looking at saturated fat.
You know, the strategy is not on making their products any safer. The strategy is to just try to confuse the public, to introduce doubt. You know, there's a famous tobacco
People kind of
industry
throw up
memo
their hands. I don't know
called
what.
doubt. Confusion is their game.
I really don't think people thought what they ate led to heart disease. They think, oh, it's genetic, my parents had it. I don't think people really think that what they ate led to diabetes. I think, oh, my parents had it, I was going to get it. And certainly cancer, they don't think that way.
People have bad lifestyles that they've inherited environmentally. They've been exposed to a certain way of eating and living that they've carried on into their adulthood, passed on to their children. That is why they go on to develop the same diseases that their parents and grandparents may have had before them. But it is not inevitable.
Even if you have a genetic predisposition, doesn't mean it's going to necessarily manifest. And what determines whether it manifests or not may be those epigenetic variables, the things that you can control, the environmental factors, the dietary factors, the lifestyle factors.
We can actually change the expression of genes, tumor-suppressing genes, tumor-activating genes, by what we eat, what we put into our body. So, you know, even if you've been dealt a bad genetic
for type
deck,
1 diabetes.
you can still...
But then, I did research and came across countless studies referencing the link between exposure to dairy at a young age and type 1 diabetes.
I mean, this is a food made for baby cows. Cow milk protein gets into the bloodstream, and the body says, hey, this isn't supposed to be in the bloodstream. It makes antibodies to the cow milk protein, which then attack the pancreas.
Milk is this hormonal fluid, so it's just packed with sex hormones and natural sex steroid hormones like estrogen, progesterone. In fact, doesn't matter if it's conventional milk, doesn't matter if it's organic milk. Milk without hormones, it's an oxymoron. Organic dairy has just as much saturated fat and cholesterol and galactose and all the things that you don't want as conventional dairy.
Dairy products in general have a lot of other products associated with it, not the least of which is pus. I mean, they actually have laws limiting how much pus you can actually have in a milk and still sell it. I believe it's like 750,000 pus cells per cc. Because, I mean, you wouldn't want too much pus and it'd be like pure pus. People might object. In fact, you could think of cheese.
Osteoporosis is a degenerative bone disease, which has been widely linked to a lack of calcium. If this is true, nations with a high intake of dairy products, which are a major source of calcium in a westernized diet, should have low levels of osteoporosis. But according to a study done by a distinguished Harvard researcher, nations with high levels of calcium intake tend to have high levels of hip fractures, which is a key indicator for osteoporosis.
And so, in fact, the higher the dairy consumption, the higher the rate of osteoporosis. Exactly the opposite of what the dairy industry has been telling us for so long. One of the primary mechanisms for that is that animal protein tends to create an acid-like condition in the body called metabolic acidosis.
To combat this condition, the body draws upon its most readily available acid buffer, namely calcium in our bones. As the calcium is extracted to neutralize the excess acid, our bones are weakened.
When I was young, we defended our product, promoted our product, because it was nature's most perfect food. And so I believe that. But it took on a slightly different twist as time passed. I mean, it's the most perfect food for cats. And trying to switch the milk of one species to another species doesn't make a lot of sense.
In World War II, the Germans occupied Norway. A Among the first things they did was confiscate all the livestock and farm animals to provide supplies for their own troops. So the Norwegians were forced to eat mainly plant-based foods.
Now we look at the deaths in Norway, just antecedent to this period, from heart attack and stroke. 1927, 1930, 35, look at right up here, right at the very top, 1939. Bingo! In come the Germans. Immediately, 1940, wow, 41, 42, 43, 44, 45. Have we ever seen a population have their cardiovascular disease plummet like this from statins, from bypass surgery, or from stents? No. But look what immediately happened. With the cessation of hostilities in 1945, back comes the meat, back comes the dairy, back comes the strokes and heart attacks. I mean, it's such an absolute powerful lesson. But we didn't get it.
And it is not necessary to eat animal tissue in order to get protein. Only plants have the ability to actually take nitrogen from the air, break those molecules apart, and incorporate that nitrogen into amino acids and then make protein. Any protein you get from an animal is simply recycled plant protein.
If you ate a diet that was calorically adequate, and even things like brown rice and broccoli, and you got enough of it, you'd get enough both quantity and quality of protein. 2,000 calories of brown rice and broccoli is going to be about 80 grams of protein a day, including the essential amino acids that you need in order to maintain optimum health.
I mean, grains are loaded with protein. Beans are loaded with protein. Vegetables are loaded with protein.
You really want to get your protein from plants because plant proteins have a much more beneficial effect on our physiology.
The funny thing about protein is most Americans get about twice the amount they need. Most Americans get less than half the amount of fiber they need. But the conversation tends to always be about protein. So in my mind, it's just this magical marketing campaign that protein has taken on over the decades.
The question is not where do you get your protein, it's where do you get your fiber?
I have never in my professional career seen a protein deficiency. I've never seen someone come in eating normal amounts of calories.
When we speak of heart disease, I would say the role of alcohol is pretty small. The role of sugar is very small too. Smoking is big, but the good news is that most people have quit or never did smoke. The problem with animal-based diet, its contribution to heart disease is huge and it is pervasive.
All this expensive imaging, procedures, bypasses, medication, none of which has one solitary single thing to do with the causation of the illness. So you die of a completely benign foodborne illness that never had its causation treated.
When we eat these kind of dead meat bacteria toxins, within minutes, you get this burst of inflammation within your system such that you basically paralyze your arteries. You get this stiffening of the arteries, their inability to relax normally in half. So it's not like decades down the road eating unhealthy, there'll be some damage. No, we're talking damage right then and there within minutes of it going into our mouth.
Many people are given the diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease when it's not true Alzheimer's at all. The vast majority of people suffer dementia due to their tiny blood vessels in their brain clogging up and their nerve cells being shortchanged of oxygenated blood. And guess where that blood vessel dementia comes from? Those little tiny arteries are clogging up from that steady stream of fat, cholesterol, etc.
It's really quite clear from the standpoint of cancer and the standpoint of cardiovascular disease that animal protein plays an enormous role.
Is chicken better?
It's a question of whether you want to be shot or hung.
The flesh food that I would eliminate from the American diet would be poultry, would be turkey and chicken. A brilliant advertising campaign has convinced people that, oh, it's white meat, it's healthier.
The leading source of sodium in the American diet for adult is chicken. It can be labeled all natural chicken, but be injected with this salt water, I think up to 800 milligrams of sodium.
Heterocyclic amines are clear-cut carcinogens, and they can form in any kind of meat as it's heated, as it's cooked. But by far the biggest source is chicken. We sent researchers into fast food and family restaurants. Not only were there carcinogens in every single restaurant, but we found them in every single chicken sample that we took. If somebody brings their family in and they're buying a bucket of chicken, nobody tells them that there are carcinogens. If you're selling carcinogens to people, you've got to warn them.
What about fish?
So fish is a little different. You've got the four worries, which is PCBs, mercury, saturated fat, and cholesterol. And the cholesterol is all over the place. You can hit tuna in water, that'll be almost less than a glass of milk, to salmon or tilapia, which is higher than a pork chop.
If you look objectively at fish, what you find is they've become essentially mercury sponges. And that's why in many parts of the country they warn you, don't have more than so many of these fish a week because it's getting too much mercury can kill you.
Fish are eaten by bigger fish who are eaten by bigger fish, and these pesticides and herbicides bioaccumulate in the fish flesh. And these big fish, including the salmon, which people think is the healthiest fish, truth is the amount of pesticides and herbicides in the flesh of these fish are shocking, and they have estrogenic and cancer-promoting properties in them.
They'll say, well, but don't sardines have less concentration of toxic waste product than other ones? Something being less toxic doesn't make it healthy. It just makes it less toxic.
Farmed fish is by no means healthier. All the antibiotics that these animals have to be fed, similar to chickens and turkeys kept in confinement. These fish get infections. They get fungal infections. They get bacterial infections. You've got to feed them antifungals, antibiotics.
To form microtubules, which surround neurofibrils, another structural protein component of the neuronal axon. Shown here is the neurite of a live neuron isolated from snail brain tissue, displaying linear growth due to growth cone activity. It is important to note that growth cones in all animal species, ranging from snails to humans, have identical structural and behavioral characteristics and use proteins of virtually identical composition. In this experiment, neurons also isolated from snail brain tissue were grown in culture for several days, after which very low concentrations of mercury were added to the culture medium for 20 minutes. Over the next 30 minutes, the neurite membrane underwent rapid degeneration, leaving behind the denuded neurofibrils seen here. In contrast, other heavy metals added at this same concentration, such as aluminum, lead, cadmium.
Food for human babies, right? Perfect food, lowest protein content any other mammal, and so it gives a sense of kind of protein requirements for food. Anything. So look, then rat milk, ape milk, donkey milk, any milk has ever been tested.
And you hear this a lot in bodybuilders. They're like, well, I need, chicken, or I need fish to be, to be strong, to build muscle tissue. That is utter nonsense. The largest, strongest terrestrial animals on the planet are all herbivores. The biggest, strongest animals are all herbivores.
When we bring in people and they're on meaty diets and we transition them to a plant-based diet, we always track what they're eating. Their vitamin intake goes up. Their nutrition overall goes up, dramatically better. And these same people might worry in advance, will I get the nutrition that I need on a plant-based diet? The fact is, you're not getting the nutrition you need on a meat-based diet, and you're going to get dramatically better nutrition on a plant-based diet.
For an average-sized guy like myself, I need about 56 grams of protein a day. That's optimum. Probably I really need 30 to 40 grams a day. Diets that are really high in these protein create diabetes, create heart disease, create cancer, create the diseases that I'm treating on a daily basis.
But this is the opposite of what all the high-protein diet fads say.
The food you eat determines the bacteria that live in your gut. Well, you eat animal flesh every day. You are summoning up bacteria that eat carnitine, and those bacteria will turn that carnitine into a molecule called trimethylamine. Your liver then turns that into trimethylamine oxide. That's a molecule from hell. That molecule drives cholesterol into the artery walls, and the people who are consuming this flesh-based diet are contributing to plaque building up. They may lose weight on this diet, and that's good, but what's happening inside your arteries, paleo friends? What's happening is that plaque is building up, and these are the folks who drop dead at the gym at 39. Boy, he was lean and he looked really good. But where is that cholesterol going? It's going into your artery walls. So I believe these paleo folks are setting themselves up for an epidemic of clogged arteries, colon cancers, autoimmune diseases. This is not a healthy diet. We are not carnivorous apes.
Humans' closest living relatives are chimps, who get 97% of their calories from plants and the remaining 3% mostly from insects. Comparing the anatomy of true omnivores like bears, who eat both meat and plants, to frugivores like primates, who eat almost exclusively plants, the differences are pretty clear. Frugivore teeth have flat molars for chewing plants, where omnivore teeth are serrated for stabbing and tearing flesh. Frugivore jaws can move forward and back and side to side. Omnivore jaws cannot. Omnivores have much stronger stomach acid for digesting meat compared to less acidic stomach acid of frugivores. The intestines of frugivores is 9 times their body length compared to 3 times for omnivores. This is because meat will putrefy in the gut unless it is moved through quickly. If humans were indeed true omnivores, we would need to change our physiology and appearance quite a lot. But we fit every requirement of a frugivore. We may behave like omnivores, but anatomically, we're frugivores.
Human beings, unlike bears and raccoons, and to some extent dogs, don't have that mixed anatomy and physiology that you see in the true omnivores, and thus we are not true omnivores. In humans, the canines have become really small and rounded and actually function like accessory incisors. They're utterly useless for ripping and tearing anything other than an envelope. So the idea that the mere presence of the canine somehow means that we're supposed to eat meat is silly.
By 1975, Dr. Campbell was at Cornell University investigating what he'd discovered in the Philippines.
Our work from the beginning was designed, in a sense, to do 2 main things. One, I wanted to replicate, if possible, the Indian work because it was so provocative. Secondly, if this is really true, I wanted to study how does it work.
Just like the Indian researchers, Campbell fed half the rats in his study a diet of 20% casein, the main protein in dairy products. The other half was fed only 5% casein. Over the 12 weeks of the study, the rats eating the higher protein diet had a greatly enhanced level of early liver cancer tumor growth. On the other hand, all of the rats eating only 5% protein had no evidence of cancer whatsoever. But Dr. Campbell decided to take these findings a step further. This time, instead of keeping his test rats on the same diet throughout the study, he kept them in one group and switched their diets back and forth between 5 and 20% dairy protein, doing so at 3-week intervals. The results were astonishing. Whenever the rats were fed 20% protein, early liver tumor growth exploded. But when the same rats were given 5% protein, tumor growth actually went down.
I mean, this was so provocative, this information. We could turn on and turn off cancer growth just by adjusting the level of intake of that protein. Going from 5% to 20% is within the range of American experience. The typical studies on chemical carcinogens causing cancer are testing chemicals at levels maybe 3 or 4 orders of magnitude higher than we experience.
Even more surprisingly, Dr. Campbell discovered that a 20% diet of plant proteins from soybeans and wheat did not promote cancer. However, there's a long-standing belief among the public that animal protein is important for human health.
When we look at this cause of heart disease, let's not be confused to blame it on genes, or just blame it on somebody's age, or blame it on the luck of the draw. Heart disease is a foodborne illness, and we now know that every time certain foods will pass your lips, you will further endanger and injure the endothelial cell capacity to make nitric oxide.
Endothelial cells are crucial to our blood vessels and heart. They line our blood vessels and produce protective nitric oxide.
And nitric oxide has these marvelous functions of keeping your blood flowing smoothly. It's the strongest vasodilator in the body. It also protects you from getting hypertension because it keeps your artery wall from getting stiff, inflamed, or thickened. And most importantly, a plentiful normal amount of nitric oxide will prevent you from ever developing blockages or plaque.
Scientists know that cardiovascular disease starts with progressive damage to the endothelial cells. This is precisely where our diets come in. The excessive consumption of animal-based or processed foods damages our endothelial cells. Regular consumption of these products increasingly diminishes the protective nitric oxide supply in our blood vessels. This leads to inflammation and a hardening and narrowing of the blood vessels. These can have life-threatening consequences like heart attack or stroke, or cause arteriosclerosis. Years of research and personal experience have provided Dr. Esselstyn with conclusive evidence that a plant-based diet can not only prevent the progression of heart disease, but can also reverse its effects. Esselstyn has successfully treated hundreds of patients with this program. It consists of a low-fat, purely plant-based diet.
When you're willing to take the time and have the patients understand the science behind this, and they really realize that they have caused this disease by the foods that they've eaten, they suddenly realize that you are empowering them as this locus of control to halt their disease. They don't have to depend upon a cardiologist or an operation or a drug that may have significant side effects. They are being empowered
When
to
you're
do this
treating
themselves.
diseases with drugs, you know, there's one drug you take for cholesterol, a different class of drugs you take for high blood pressure, different class of drugs you take for diabetes. But with diet, a plant-based diet affects all these diseases. One diet to kind of rule them all.
The impacts of eating this way go far beyond ourselves. By getting rid of heart disease alone, we would save up to $48 trillion in the USA, 3 times the US GDP.
Conditions like high blood pressure, you don't have to take the drugs the rest of your life and be sick forever. What you can do is live in such a way that it gives the body a chance to heal itself. We took 174 consecutive patients with high blood pressure, and 174 people were able to lower their blood pressure enough to eliminate the need for medication.
For inflammatory bowel disease like Crohn's, the best remission rates ever achieved through plant-based diet. MS, multiple sclerosis, the best results ever achieved compared to any medical, surgical, any kind of intervention was a plant-based diet.
You can see that with every sequential reduction in animal products, people live longer, they have less heart disease, they have less cancer, they have less diabetes.
You can actually take human cancer cells, put them in a petri dish, and you can drip the blood of those eating vegan, get about 72% suppression in human prostate cancer cell growth in vitro. They wanted to try this again with women and breast cancer. So they said, let's see what a plant-based diet can do. After just 2 weeks, their bodies cleaned up. You drip their blood on the same carpet of cancer cells. You can clear off the whole plate. This is after just 2 weeks eating healthy, which raises the question, you know, what kind of blood do we want in our bodies?
My background is in industrial and systems engineering, and that was my career path for a long time until I got thyroid cancer, and everything changed from there. I decided that I wanted to try alternative methods and treatments rather than have surgery and have my thyroid removed, which meant I'd be on medication forever, and I didn't want that. I just started reading how a plant-based diet can heal the body, and it has worked for so many people. So I immediately just switched to a completely whole food plant-based diet. After a year, the cancer was completely gone, and my thyroid had shrunk to normal size, and I
She
was
credits her
completely free
vegan
of that.
diet for her longevity and says it keeps her feeling good.
Nothing but fruit, vegetables, and nuts, and well, it's all there in the Bible.
Laureen is likely the oldest woman in all of Oregon, but that's not official because the state does not keep those records.
We know that heredity is a big factor in longevity. Probably 50% it rates as being that influential. I don't have a particularly good heredity. 3 of my grandparents died at 72. My grandmother lived to about 85. Nobody in my family has lived to be my age. Then, of course, you get into the matter of your lifestyle. And I think that one has to be at peace in his mind as well as in his, as well as have other good health habits. And perhaps that's the reason why the Seventh-day Adventists have this 7 to 10 years. They say they live longer than the average, is that I think they do have a sort of a peace of mind which they get from their religious convictions. I happen to be a vegetarian, and I think it has its advantages in longevity. I'm actually a vegan. A lot of people will say, well, where do you get your vitamin B12 from, and where do you get your protein from, and all that, but we know these days that that's no problem, really. to have a real balanced diet on a vegetarian diet. A lot of people get up and just run down the road, you know what I mean? With me, I'm not that disciplined. I have to have some structured form of exercise where I see some benefits of what I do. I go out and I'll prune a tree or mow the lawn or dig the garden or something like that. And I'll help my wife in the house even, run the vacuum cleaner, something that's active. They do say that being married is an advantage. In other words, a matter of social support, you know what I mean? And I came from a large family. That is, there were 6 siblings in my family, and I have 5 children. I think that that is a big factor, all right, in a person's peace of mind.